Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith, and I'm talking live from Baku, Azerbaijan. And day one of COP29 is finished. It's been quite a long and eventful day, and I thought I'd give a kind of a summary of what I've been up to today. So my day started when my alarm went off at 5:01, and from 5 a.m. to about 6 a.m. I played in a poker game with friends, zero stakes. We don't play for money. There's about myself and about 8 chess player friends who are all in Ontario, or most of them are, where it was 8 p.m. at night. And then I fell asleep promptly after that finished, and we woke up about 9:30, and then I was off to the COP about 10ish or so. And we then basically we got there, and because we weren't familiar with it, this is the first day, we tried to walk around as much of the region as possible. And it's long, things are separated, probably got well over 10,000 steps for the day. We went by the plenary rooms to see where we'll be doing press conferences later in the week. We went by the exhibits, probably spent most of our time in the exhibits. And went to the Canada Pavilion, and Steven Guilbeault, who's Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister, was there finishing up a talk. So we kind of hung around, and I managed to ask him a number of questions, mostly focusing on the 1.5 degree fixation that the UN and the climate conferences have, even though we're experiencing yearly temperatures. This year is going to come out to 1.55 or 1.6 degrees Celsius, and that's relative to the 1850 to 1900 baseline. And we really need to, question that baseline, because originally it was 1750, and the difference between the year 1750 and the average of 1850 to 1900 is about 0.15, 0.2 degrees or so. So you need to add that on. Then went to the Oceans Pavilion, went to the Cryosphere Pavilion and listened to an interesting talk on lake ice in northern Canada lakes. Ice roads basically need to be constructed to reach northern communities, and of course it's harder and harder to get ice roads to last for any length of time, so people are looking at permanent roads. And I asked about the possibility of using blimps, and he'd heard about it, the speaker, but everybody kind of laughs at the idea at the moment, and they will until they start actually doing that, I think in a few years. Then moved on to the Oceans Pavilion to see a presentation by Sean Fitzgerald, who's the one of the heads of the Climate Repair Center at Cambridge University in England. And Sean was moderating a panel of about 4 or 5 people on a topic called OCDR, Ocean Carbon Dioxide Removal. I've talked about carbon dioxide removal in the past. You can talk about it in trying to take CO2 out of the air directly, direct air capture. But I think that the oceans are the way to go for sure. So it was a very interesting panel. Meanwhile, parts of the day were extremely warm. The heat and humidity were extremely high. This is because it was packed with people, and we as a mass of people overcame the ventilation system, and the heat went up to like 27 Celsius plus, with humidity as high as 67%, and CO2 levels reached about 4,000 parts per million, which is about 10 times the nominal value of 420 at Mauna Loa in Hawaii. So there have been papers showing that when CO2 levels are above, say, 800, even as low as 800, 1200, that sort of thing, people do less well on cognition tests. There's confusion, there's angst, and it's very hard to have a climate meeting under such conditions when people are cognitively impaired by high CO2 levels. There's a lot of irony in that, but I think that's the case. How do I know? Well, I have this AeroNet CO2 detector, which right now is showing that the CO2 I'm breathing is about 1049 parts per million, 26 Celsius and 55. It just jumped up because I'm breathing on the sensor. Okay, so this guy takes data every minute and stores it, and I can look at that data later because I wore it around the entire COP conference. But, it was approaching wet bulb temperatures. When it reached 27 or 28, 67% humidity with high CO2 level, wet bulb is, of course, 35 Celsius and 100% humidity, but the human body starts to have trouble at about 31 Celsius and 100% humidity. So ironically, we were reaching extremely hot and humid temperatures, and if the ventilation had been a little bit worse, we could have possibly had people keeling over going to first aid centers at the climate conference because of, conditions that were just too hot and humid. Another great irony, I think. So, and then after that, I had my third CTV TV national interview. CTV television is one of Canada's national broadcasters. It was the Toronto office, I believe, and I had an interview at 6:10 p.m. Baku time, which works out to about 9:10 Toronto time, so it's on prime time Canadian news, and it was great. I had about a 6-minute clip. And I brought up the issues with Steven Guilbeault, Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister, who I'd also talked to about my CO2 device. And, when I was speaking with him, it was 2000. And I said, okay, so the CO2 level that you and I are breathing in right now is 5 times higher than the 420. So I think, that he says, oh, that's a cool device sort of thing. So maybe he'll get one and take that into consideration. Then, after the CTV interview, which is my third one in 4 days, I went to a solar radiation management panel, which was all about different ideas to, the Pinatubo sulfur in the atmosphere was brought up, and to introduce the idea. And the idea is sort of governance of SRM, solar radiation management to cool the planet. They gave different ideas. I, of course, asked a question, as I always try to do. I always try to get the attention of the chooser's eye, who's choosing who asks questions. And I was the last person to ask a question. And I said, have you considered with SRM that we're doing involuntary, accidental SRM? We have been for the last decade or so, because the International Maritime Organization reduced sulfur in shipping fuels starting in about 2015, or maybe that was 2017, and then they ratcheted it up in 2020. And James Hansen has talked about it quite a bit and shown the effects of reduced sulfur in shipping fuels, and it means that the areas where those ships plied, that sulfur created low-level clouds and blocked some sunlight. So with the sulfur removal and less low-level clouds, then there was more absorption of solar radiation, and thus a heating of the ocean on those shipping routes. So very clear-cut data that also shows that the response of the Earth to sulfur is extremely high, which is a very good thing, because it means that we should be able to cool the planet with sulfur and not use much sulfur. So we want the sulfur in the stratosphere to do the cooling, where it's much more effective. So we should really replace the sulfur that we've taken out of shipping fuels, and it also harms people, right? At low levels, we get 1 million deaths a year on the planet from air pollution, breathing, directly probably due to sulfur, but this is sulfur emitted over the oceans from ships. So that was really fascinating and interesting, the panel. And then Sean Fitzgerald met us, and we did a climate emergency forum video. I interviewed Sean Fitzgerald for about half an hour or so, mostly on his topic of OCDR, ocean carbon dioxide removal, but I also brought in things like SRM, and also talked about the orange guy and the tech guy. Now, I don't want to spoil the show. Those are just teasers, so make sure that you follow climateemergencyforum.org because very soon, hopefully, we'll have a video out of this interview. And then, of course, we left COP. You know, it was, I went around COP and filmed a video for about 15 minutes just to give you an idea of what NGO booths there were, what countries there were, you know, the layout, just to give you a feel for what the COP is like, because you're at your place and you're not at the COP. So, you know, when people just think of the COP as sort of a black box, they don't really know what happens. They know the result, and the CO2 emissions have continued to rise at accelerating levels, even though this is the 29th COP, rather, over 30 years. We missed one during COVID. And then, of course, the evening continued. Sean Fitzgerald, being from Cambridge, working in the UK, we had to bring him to a place called the London Pub, which we discovered the previous day. So great Beatles pictures, great London telephone booths and the red double-decker buses and all the stuff about London, and it was excellent. It seemed really like a British pub, and he really enjoyed it. You know, and we continued our discussion. Now, don't tell him I'm saying this, but I'm going to let in a little secret. And I found out what I think is one of his primary motivating factors to be so successful. Sean was awarded the Royal Society of Engineers Award about less than 10 years ago, about 8 years ago or so. And after that, he was awarded the Order of the British Empire. And these things are generally awarded, at least the Royal Society one, from votes from your peers. So Sean has done an awful lot of work and been very successful. And I think that his motivation may go back to Dagenham, London, which is a region in London, in his childhood, which is at a place called the Ford Motor Plant in Dagenham, which is where my grandfather actually worked. So here's the connections. So I told him about if he knew where Dagenham was. My grandfather worked there, is from London, and loved West Ham, the soccer team, which was in last place almost every year in the lowest division. So anyway, Sean had a story where he actually, in school, in a sociology class, visited Dagenham, London, and saw the factory and how things worked. And what he remembers is this guy there had a job of putting a nut onto a screw. This was his job, putting a nut onto a screw, and they did it in 2-hour shifts because the management figured 2 hours was sufficient time. And the torque probably had to be right, or the nut would pop off, or if it was too tight, it could strip the bolt. So it was very, I don't know what the nut was doing. Maybe it was holding the whole car together, for all I know. But anyway, that's, he told me this story vividly, and I thought, this was some of his motivation. Often we're motivated by positive things, but often by negative things. And I think Sean saw this and thought, I can't be doing that job. I have to study. I have to work really hard, be very successful, and get the Royal Society of Engineers Award and the OBE. And I kind of think, I don't think he needs to worry about putting a nut on a bolt. Also, happy birthday, Sean. It's after midnight right now. It's his birthday today. And I'm doing this video at about 12:30 in the morning. It's been a long day. I wanted to talk about this when it's all fresh in my mind, because after, a day tomorrow at the COP, I'm sure I'll have all these new stories to tell you. And, the recall on what happens in a day, I'd probably forget a bunch of stuff. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for donating to paulbeckwith.net to support my research and videos. Thank you for the GoFundMe contributions to offset my costs of the COP. And also thank you to the Climate Emergency Forum, Charles and Heidi, for filming Sean and I, and for being the brains behind the CEF website. So thanks again, and we'll chat tomorrow, I'm sure. Okay, bye for now.